Irish author Claire Keegan is a writer I only discovered relatively recently, thanks to the publication of her novella Small Things Like These, which I did a video on not too long ago. But thanks to the fact that she is a master of short fiction, I've been able to tear through most of her works pretty quickly. And the beauty of reading all of these pretty much back to back is that the genius of her writing and her storytelling becomes very apparent very immediately. But that said, nailing down what exactly makes Claire Keegan such an accomplished, such a special and such an important author is still kind of difficult. It's something that is a challenge to put into words, which is ironic given the fact that Claire Keegan is a master of language. And I guess that's kind of a good first point to make, because Claire Keegan isn't a wordsmith in the way that Oscar Wilde was, where every single word, every single sentence is beautiful, is evocative and poetic and aesthetically charming and tantalizing. It's not that. Instead of every word and sentence in her writing being beautiful, every word and sentence is important, carries weight and meaning. I can imagine, although I don't know this for certain, that Claire Keegan is a real stickler for editing, of cutting her writing down and down and down until only the purest language, the most important words, are left. Kind of like making a sculpture and chiseling away until you have the art at the center of it. All that's left is the beauty of it. But as I said, her language isn't that beautiful. It isn't flowery. Instead, it kind of reminds me of something George Orwell once said, which I'm paraphrasing, but he said that you should never use a long word when a short word will do. He was a believer in simple language to convey your point, because if you use long and flowery and beautiful poetic language, you can lose your audience, you can alienate certain readers, but he had important things to say, and he wanted to say them. And I think his writing has a lasting impact on a wide spectrum of people for that reason. He understood that simplicity and the ability to convey your point through your language is very, very important. And I really get that sense from Claire Keegan's writing. Her stories are simple affairs. She's able to convey so much human experience and so much human emotion and connection through so few pages. So few words, such little dialogue, because she takes care of her language, because she is considerate of her reader and of the writing itself. And I think that's so intelligent. I don't actually use the word intelligent very often when I talk about books and authors. I don't really know why. It's not really an adjective I use. But Claire Keegan is an intelligent writer. You can tell that there is a courtesy being paid to the reader and to the craft itself in her writing. I think the best way to show that her writing is simple but powerful and still beautiful is to just read the opening page of this. This is So Late in the Day. It's a short story. It's about 50 pages long. The text is really, really large, and I actually read it in bed before I fell asleep, all in one go. It took like half an hour, maybe less. It's a tiny little thing. It's really beautifully presented, and it cost way too much for what it is, but I couldn't resist it. Given the fact that it is basically a short story, it's kind of difficult not to spoil So Late in the Day, but I'm still going to try because it's important not to spoil it, I think. So Late in the Day tells the story of a man called Cathal. He's a middle-aged guy who works a random office job in the middle of Dublin in the present day, and when the novel begins, he's looking out of his window and kind of admiring the city. He makes a few mistakes, careless mistakes in his office job. His mind isn't really there. His boss tells him to just go home, and then we follow him as he gets on the bus, talks to a random lady on the bus, gets off at his home, which is in a village or a suburban area outside of the city. We watch him heat up and eat a ready meal, and some cake, and some champagne. And all the while, we flash back about a year to a relationship that he had with a woman called Sabine, who I think is half French, half English, if I remember rightly. He and Sabine were dating for a while, and it got more serious, and we kind of just examine their relationship from his perspective. And we look at all the mistakes he made, and it's obvious from the very beginning that she's no longer around, so we know we're just going to spend a few dozen pages watching a relationship blossom and then fall apart. It's very sad, it's very somber, it's kind of tragic, but it opens very, very beautifully. On Friday, July 29th, Dublin got the weather that was forecast. All morning, a brazen sun shone across Merrion Square, reaching onto Cathal's desk where he was stationed by the open window. A taste of cut grass blew in, and every now and then a close breeze stirred the ivy on the ledge. When a shadow crossed, he looked out. A gulp of swallows, skirmishing high up in camaraderie. Down on the lawns, some people were out sunbathing, and there were children, and beds plump with flowers. So much of life carrying smoothly on, despite the tangle of human upsets, and the knowledge of how everything must end. It's simple, it's clean, it's clear, but the phrase tangle of human upsets is utterly stunning. What a beautiful turn of phrase. A tangle of human upsets is a thing that hits me really, really hard. It's so evocative of the idea that we are tangled up in our own issues, in our own modern day problems, but we are also a tangle of problems as a group, as a community. It is so encouraging as a phrase to make us think about our problems as an independent thing and as a group thing, suffering together rather than suffering alone, but also that we are alone in our suffering because we're tangled up. It's beautifully evocative, and I thought it was stunning. And the language obviously continues like that all the way through. There are a lot of writers, I've read countless writers, who write very beautiful, poetic, flowery language for the first few chapters of a book, and when they get into the flow of it, that kind of slips away. And quite often, in a very cynical way, I think it's because publishers usually ask writers for the first few chapters of their book, and so they're going to put the most beautiful language in that bit so that the publisher says yes to publishing it. I don't know if that's true, but it's how I often take it. But that's certainly not true for Claire Keegan, because she clearly has an enormous amount of respect for the craft. And then we look at Foster, which is her most successful thing. When I put on social media that I was going to read this, people went nuts. A lot of people still haven't read So Late in the Day or Small Things Like These, but everyone has read Foster, and it was also made into a film, which I haven't seen. Foster is another beautifully simple story. And again, this is a novella, it's about 90 pages long, and it's so stunning, because I read So Late in the Day just before I went to bed, and it really bummed me out. So Late in the Day is very sad. It's pretty aggressively feminist, in my opinion. I saw it as a very feminist story about male naivete, about patriarchy and the things that men take for granted, the things that men assume are just going to happen. It's about passivity. It's about men just assuming their role in society and a woman's role as well, and how that assumption can come crumbling down. But Foster is a lot more positive. It's beautiful and hopeful, with an ending that is kind of vague, but certainly, again, hopeful. Foster is set in the early 80s, and it's told from the perspective of a narrator protagonist who is a young girl. She comes from a big family, her parents have multiple children, and her mother is pregnant again. It's the summertime, and she is taken by her father to go stay with a couple she doesn't know, a middle-aged couple who live far away, and she's going to stay with them over the summer for some reason, while her mother gives birth. She's scared, she's worried, she doesn't know what to anticipate, and when she first arrives, she feels like an outsider, she feels like a stranger. She's really, really nervous and quiet and unsettled. And then something shifts. The couple that have taken her in, at least for the summer, treat her with an immense amount of kindness and consideration and attention. They feed her really, really well. They get her to help out with the gardening and the chores. They make her feel like a part of the family. They laugh with her. They encourage her to talk. They ask her lots of questions. And you immediately get the impression that none of this was true with her actual family. That she maybe isn't seen and given enough attention and given room to talk and grow and be inquisitive, ask questions, all the things that we encourage children to do so that they grow and learn and become free-thinking, introspective, curious people. This couple does all of that. They take her into town, they give her new clothes, they feed her really well, they take her to mass, they make her a part of their community, both in terms of their family unit and also in terms of the neighborhood and the town that they live in. Suddenly she feels like she's being treated like a human being and a family member and a daughter. She sees love and family in a very different way that she's never had the chance to before because of her circumstances. At no point are her real family blamed for this. There is no blame. There is no cynicism and anger here. It's simply just admiring and taking on board and processing the fact that there are different ways to live, different ways for a family to exist. Different, not better. And I think that's really beautiful. And again, it's the minimalism of Claire Keegan's language that allows for that to be conveyed. Claire Keegan never patronizes people. She never encourages us to think a certain way. If you've ever written a story, even just for fun, you might have thought to yourself, oh, how do I make sure the reader understands that this is what's going on, or this is how this character feels? As a former English teacher, I used to have to teach this storytelling and writing method to my students. We used to talk about how to convey a character's personality, their feelings, their thoughts, in a more interesting way than being too direct or patronizing the reader. And Claire Keegan is so expert at doing that. She allows her language room to breathe. She allows her characters to think and feel and process those feelings in a very human way, in a very quiet and subtle way, as we typically do. And she doesn't ever preach to the audience. At no point does the little girl in this story go, this is a better life. She doesn't think that way. We might interpret it that way, and I obviously did, but you don't have to. There is just enough vagueness here to make it compelling and to give the audience something to do. She's giving you an exercise in compassion and empathy. How do you respond to this? What do you think? What do you feel? How do you connect with these characters in this story? The minimalism of her writing, the simplicity of it, encourages that behavior, and it's so beautiful and so respectful and kind to the reader. I've already talked a lot about small things like these, so I won't belabor that, but this is the story that comes closest to making a specific point. When I did my review of this, I talked about how a lot of people seem to see this as a happy Christmas tale about family and community, and I interpreted it more as a pretty aggressively anti-religious story about the ways in which religion is corrupt and corrupts other people, and people think they're doing good when they're so obviously doing bad. But the fact that I interpreted this different from a lot of people, and a lot of commenters in that video agreed with me, means that there are kind of factions when it comes to how to interpret this story. Different thought processes, different ways of empathizing and connecting. Great, brilliant. Keegan invites that. I think it's beautiful. And I had other commenters in that video who were much smarter than me, much more introspective and thoughtful, and I got the impression maybe slower readers in a good way, people who took their time to really digest this. I get into the habit of reading things very, very quickly so I can make videos and get on to the next thing, and reading kind of becomes a habit of mine rather than a really beautiful hobby that I'm lucky to have. Anyway, I'm getting off track. There were people in my comments who were very, very clever, who'd maybe read this a few times and very, very slowly, who had even deeper and more important things to say than I did about these characters, things that I completely missed, especially about the protagonist, who I kind of saw as a bit holier than thou, and people said, no, he's not. There are faults to his character. Here they are. And I was really amazed by that, and I was really grateful. But again, this speaks to the genius of Claire Keegan's writing, the fact that some people had a kind of shallow reading of this book. I took it a layer deeper and talked about that, and other people went a layer deeper than that. That's wonderful. As, again, a former English teacher who encouraged critical literary analysis and loves doing it, and I've made a job out of it, I'm so happy that we have an author here, a wonderful literary author, whose writing encourages dense, tense, and layered critical analysis. I haven't reread any of these stories yet, but I need to, because her writing deserves that kind of attention. It deserves to be read and reread, analysed and reanalyzed, empathized with, considered, and chewed over multiple times. There is such incredible beauty in the writing of Claire Keegan, and while I've struggled to sort of get a handle on what that is exactly and kind of put it into a nice, easy single sentence or paragraph, I hope that by exploring these books, giving a kind of rough overview of them and talking about how they impacted me, it's pretty clear why her writing is so special. The way in which she gives her characters and her writing room to breathe and encourages empathy and encourages a bit of critical thinking. That's what makes these literary stories so beautiful and so important. I'm really amazed by Claire Keegan's writing, and I really, really would again value people in the comments giving me great analysis and talking about what they think makes her writing so special. Because there are going to be things I haven't mentioned here, things I've forgotten. There's always stuff I forget to mention in videos. I don't script them. So let me know. She's a real gift. And just as a final note, David Mitchell, the author, not the comedian, compared Claire Keegan's works to those of Anton Chekhov, and I am a real big fan of Chekhov. I've seen Uncle Vanya and The Cherry Orchard. When I saw Uncle Vanya, he was played by Toby Jones, and it was amazing. And when I saw The Cherry Orchard, Ian McKellen was in it. I love those plays. I actually studied The Cherry Orchard when I was at university. Big Chekhov fan. And I get it. I totally know exactly what David Mitchell means when he compares Claire Keegan to Chekhov. This hyper-realism and quiet, subtle approach to drama and humanity, they both have that, and it's so beautiful. That's just a final thought. I totally agree with David Mitchell there. And now I want to go see a Chekhov play. Alright, go read some Claire Keegan. It might change your life. And subscribe for books.